Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. Nursery, where the cries never fade. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Return. Emma stood at the edge of her childhood town, the faded memories pressing down on her like a thick fog. The streets felt foreign yet hauntingly familiar, each corner echoing with whispers of laughter that once filled the air. It had been years since she had left, and now she returned, summoned by the chilling news of her estranged mother's passing. The mixed feelings of anger and sorrow twisted in her gut, threatening to spill over. As she drove, the landscape shifted from the sprawling cityscape to the dilapidated charm of her hometown. The old houses leaned against one another, as if sharing secrets. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and an unsettling silence hung like a shroud. She turned down the narrow road leading to the nursery, its outline visible through the skeletal branches of leafless trees. Once a vibrant sanctuary for children, the nursery now loomed before her like a specter of the past. Its once bright paint was chipped and faded, the windows clouded with dust, and the garden overrun with weeds. Emma parked the car, hesitating before stepping out. The air felt charged, almost electric, as she made her way toward the entrance, a heavy door that creaked ominously as she pushed it open. Inside, the scent of baby powder lingered, twisted and stale, wrapping around her like a shroud. She felt the cool breeze that swept through the open windows, stirring the dust motes that danced in the dim light. Shadows flickered across the walls, and the floorboards creaked beneath her weight, the sounds echoing in the oppressive silence. Emma's heart raced, caught between nostalgia and dread. As she ventured deeper, memories flooded back, the laughter of children, the soothing lullabies sung by her mother, the warmth of safety. But that warmth had long since turned to ash, replaced by an unsettling presence that prickled at the back of her mind. A sudden noise broke the silence, a rustle, then a soft cry. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. Was it her imagination? She had come to confront her mother's legacy, to unearth the truth behind their fractured relationship. But as she moved further into the nursery, a tattered envelope on the dusty counter caught her eye. Her mother's will lay open, the ink still fresh despite the years that had passed. It spoke of the nursery, a dark history tangled in sorrow. The words ignited a spark of determination within her. She couldn't leave without uncovering its secrets. Emma was drawn in, ready to confront whatever lingered in the shadows of her past. Chapter 2. The Nursery's Secrets. Emma stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest as she peered at the envelope that had promised answers. With a shaky breath, she pocketed the will and stepped further into the nursery. The air was thick with dust, each step sending clouds swirling around her ankles, each breath tasting of stale sorrow. The familiar scent of baby powder hung heavily, tinged with something far less comforting: mold, decay, and the bittersweet weight of forgotten memories. The nursery was a graveyard of childhood dreams. As she moved through the dimly lit room, she was struck by the sight of forgotten toys scattered across the floor. A faded teddy bear with one button eye, a set of building blocks chipped and cracked, and a doll whose porcelain face had begun to yellow. A shiver ran down her spine. The cribs stood like sentinels, their white paint peeling, each bed a silent reminder of the lives once cradled there. Walls adorned with faded drawings of suns and rainbows whispered stories of innocence lost. Emma ran her fingers over the crude, colorful crayon marks, her mind flashing back to a time when laughter echoed through these halls. But that laughter had been replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in around her, amplifying the whispers she could now hear, soft, unintelligible murmurs that curled around her as if the nursery itself was alive, yearning to share its secret. As she turned to leave the main room, a flicker of light caught her eye. The bulb overhead sputtered to life, casting shadows that danced along the walls. Emma's heart raced as she sensed a presence in the room. She watched an unshakable feeling that someone or something lingered just beyond her line of sight. She fought against the rising tide of panic, pulling on the threads of her memory. Images of her mother's face swam in her mind, the shadows of grief etched into her features. After the loss of her younger sibling, a child Emma barely remembered, her mother had become a shell of the vibrant woman she once was. The nursery had once been a refuge, but it became a prison of sorrow, a place where her mother would sit in silence, cradling Emma in her lap, while the world outside continued to spin. Why couldn't she let it go? Emma murmured aloud, her voice echoing in the oppressive silence. Why did she bring me back here? In that moment, the whispers grew louder, swirling around her like a chilling wind. Emma turned, eyes wide, scanning the dark corners of the nursery. A flicker of movement caught her eye, and she froze, breathless. In the dim light, she could just make out a shadow darting past, a fleeting glimpse of something childlike, something lost. "Is anyone there?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper, swallowed by the heavy silence. The only answer was a soft, shivering giggle that sent ice coursing through her veins. The nursery, once a cradle of comfort, had transformed into a labyrinth of secrets. Each step deeper into its heart pulled her closer to an unsettling truth she could no longer ignore. Chapter 3: Unseen Shadows. The giggle faded, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Emma's pulse quickened as she turned, the nursery shadows twisting around her like fingers, clutching her heart with an icy grip. She could feel it, the presence lurking just beyond her vision, teasing her with the promise of understanding, while simultaneously pushing her deeper into confusion. The sensation of being watched intensified, and she fought against the instinct to flee. Shaking off the chill, she stepped further into the dim light, her eyes scanning the room. As she approached a dusty corner, she caught sight of the doll, a once pristine porcelain figure, now smeared with grime. Its eyes seemed to glimmer, almost alive. Emma blinked, and in that fleeting moment, the doll shifted, tilting its head as if regarding her with a sentient gaze. She staggered back, heart racing. No, it couldn't be. It was just her imagination, a trick of the mind. But the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, she returned to her childhood home, her mind racing with the day's events. The sound of laughter replayed in her head, a haunting echo that refused to fade. She tossed and turned, sleep eluding her. Shadows flitted across the walls of her room, whispering secrets she wasn't ready to hear. In the morning light, Emma sought solace at a local cafe, hoping the mundane routine of breakfast would calm her frazzled nerves. As she stirred her coffee, she overheard a group of townsfolk at a nearby table. They spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting towards her, their words heavy with implication. "She's back," one woman murmured, glancing at Emma. "The nursery's never been the same since they took the children away." Curiosity piqued, Emma leaned in, straining to hear. "Strange things happen there. Kids who never leave," another voice whispered. "Some say it's cursed." The stories wrapped around her, thickening the air with unease. Unable to resist, Emma approached the table, her heart pounding. "Excuse me," she said, trying to sound casual. "What do you mean about the nursery? What happened to the children?" The locals exchanged wary glances. Finally, an elderly man spoke, his voice gruff but tinged with concern. "You're best to stay away from that place, girl. Too many stories of lost souls. The cries of children still echo in those walls. It's a place of sorrow." The words struck Emma like a physical blow, igniting a whirlwind of anxiety. As she left the cafe, her thoughts spiraled. Could the tales be true? Had she been drawn back to confront not just her past, but the remnants of lost children who lingered in the shadows? Later, she met up with Liam, hoping to ground herself in rationality. As she recounted the town's rumors, she watched his expression shift from concern to skepticism. "Emma, come on. You can't seriously believe that stuff. It's just small-town gossip." His tone was steady, but a hint of worry laced his words. "But what if there's truth in it?" She shot back, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I heard things, Liam. I felt things." "Let's not jump to conclusions," he replied, his brow furrowing. "You're still grieving, and it's messing with your head. We should be careful." The weight of their conversation settled heavily on Emma. She wanted to trust Liam, but how could she ignore what she experienced? The unseen shadows of the nursery were growing darker, pulling her deeper into a mystery she wasn't sure she could unravel alone. As night fell, she felt the pull of the nursery calling her back, each flicker of light and echo of laughter, urging her to confront the darkness within. Chapter 4: The Haunting History. The sun cast long shadows across the library as Emma buried herself in the research, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through aged records and newspaper clippings. The aroma of old paper mixed with the faint scent of dust and ink, a comforting yet foreboding combination. The town's history was inscribed in these pages, and every line she read felt like peeling back layers of a long-buried secret. Emma felt an almost magnetic pull as she discovered the nursery's unsettling past. The records detailed a long line of children placed there, many of whom came from broken homes, or worse, tragic circumstances. As she read, a sense of dread twisted in her gut. In the late 70s, reports began to emerge about disappearances linked to the nursery children who vanished without a trace, their fates forever a mystery. "Why was I never told?" Emma murmured, the words barely escaping her lips as she scanned the articles. They spoke of whispers in the night, of dark corners in the nursery where laughter turned to cries. The nursery had been shut down after an investigation found it unfit for children, yet the records showed no closure for those who had lived there. The mention of those lost souls awakened her own buried memories, fragments of her childhood that had long been suppressed. She remembered the hollow look in her mother's eyes after the death of her sibling, how the nursery had transformed from a sanctuary into a prison of grief. In those moments, her mother had slipped into darkness, haunted by guilt and sorrow, and Emma had felt the icy grip of abandonment take hold. As her reflection deepened, Emma stumbled upon a leather-bound journal tucked away on a dusty shelf in the library's local history section. The cover was worn and cracked, and she could barely read the faded name of the previous caretaker, Margaret Hargrove. Intrigued, she opened it, revealing pages filled with cramped, frenzied handwriting. As she read through the entries, a chill ran through her. Margaret described the strange occurrences that plagued the nursery children's laughter that turned into desperate wails, shadows that danced just beyond the reach of light, and the increasing madness that consumed the caretakers. The last entry was scrawled hastily, the ink smeared as if written in panic. I can hear them crying. "They won't let me leave. They need me to stay." Emma's breath caught in her throat. The haunting cries Margaret wrote about mirrored the ones she had heard since returning. The words seemed to reach out to her, connecting her to the past in a way she hadn't anticipated. The nursery wasn't just a relic of her childhood. It was a graveyard of lost innocence, a dark reflection of her own trauma. She closed the journal, her mind racing. The nursery held secrets that intertwined her life with those of the children who had never escaped its grasp. Emma stood, determination flooding her veins. She had to confront the nursery, to uncover the truth, not just for herself, but for all the lost souls whose cries still echoed in the silence. It was time to face the darkness lurking in the shadows. Chapter 5. The Cries Return. The air was thick with tension as Emma stepped back into the nursery, the shadows swallowing her whole. The journal still clutched in her hands. She felt the echoes of Margaret Hargrove's words reverberate in her mind. They need me to stay. Each footfall echoed loudly in the silence, amplifying the weight of her memories and fears. The nursery was not merely a structure. It was a living entity that thrummed with the cries of lost children, and now the cries of her own sibling. As she moved deeper into the room, the atmosphere shifted. The familiar scent of baby powder turned sour, and the walls seemed to breathe. Then it happened, the unmistakable sound of a child crying, soft at first, but it grew louder, more insistent. Emma froze, her breath hitching in her throat. This cry was not just any child's. It was the cry of her lost sibling. The sound twisted her heart, drawing her into the depths of her grief, intertwining the past with the present until she could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. "I am here. Please, just tell me what you want." The cries intensified, filling the air with sorrow, clawing at her sanity. Emma clutched her head, the weight of memories crashing down around her. Visions of her mother, broken and lost, flooded her mind, and she felt the nursery constrict around her. The past had become a noose, tightening with every sob, every echo of her mother's pain. Desperation propelled her forward. "Show yourself," she shouted, her voice slicing through the air. "I know you're here. I'm not afraid." But the shadows only deepened, and suddenly the atmosphere shifted. A gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the weak light and plunging her into darkness. In the pitch black, she felt a presence, cold and unyielding, pressing against her. It wrapped around her like an icy fog, squeezing the breath from her lungs. Then she saw it. A figure materialized from the shadows, a childlike silhouette with hauntingly hollow eyes, reaching toward her. "Stay with us," it whispered, the sound echoing in her mind like a long-buried memory clawing its way to the surface. Emma stumbled back, her heart racing. This wasn't just a vision. It felt all too real. The icy grip of fear seeped into her bones. "Emma!" Liam's voice shattered the tension as he rushed into the room, eyes wide with panic. "We need to get out of here." She turned to him, breathless, shaken to her core. "You don't understand. I can't leave. I have to know why they're crying." "Emma, this isn't safe," he pleaded, concern etched on his face. "This place is messing with your head. We should go now." But Emma shook her head fiercely, the pull of the nursery stronger than ever. "I can't. They need me. I need to find out what happened." Conflict between them escalated, his fear clashing against her desperate resolve. "You're not thinking straight. What if place is hurting you? Maybe it's already too late," she shouted back, her heart racing as the cries swelled around her, drowning out the sound of reason. The nursery had become a battleground, one where memories entwined with reality, and she had to fight to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Chapter 6. Descent into Madness. The nursery's shadows wrapped around Emma like a shroud, and every visit morphed her reality further into a tangled web of memories and hallucinations. Days turned into a blur, the world outside the nursery fading into a distant hum as she spiraled deeper into obsession. Her nights were haunted by visions, fragments of her childhood that flickered through her mind like a broken film reel. She could see herself standing in the nursery, a child again, alone and frightened, her mother's laughter echoing cruelly against the walls. "Stay with us," the whisper returned, a haunting lullaby that lured her deeper into the recesses of her trauma. The nursery rhyme her mother used to sing, now twisted into a macabre reminder of her fractured past, each word punctuated by the weight of unresolved grief. It played on repeat in her mind, a dark symphony orchestrated by her own fear. Emma often caught herself speaking to the air, her conversations punctuated by moments of silence where she believed the nursery itself was listening. "Why did you leave me?" she would demand, the walls seeming to absorb her words, leaving her with nothing but the echo of her own despair. Liam's presence became a shadow of its former self. He would come by, his brows furrowed with concern, trying to reach her through the veil of her madness. "Emma, please, you're not yourself. We need to talk about this," he'd urge, desperation creeping into his voice. But she brushed him off, convinced he didn't understand the importance of her quest. "You don't know what I've seen," she would snap, pushing him further away, feeling the thread of their connection fraying with each argument. Each attempt he made to pull her back into reality felt like a betrayal, a sign of his ignorance toward the truths she was uncovering. As the days passed, she began isolating herself completely. The outside world faded, friends stopped calling, her job went unattended, and her life shrank to the size of the nursery's walls. She couldn't afford distractions, not when she was so close to unearthing the truth. Every creak of the floorboards sent shivers down her spine, each flicker of the lights a message from the shadows, urging her to continue her search. And then, the visions became more vivid. One afternoon, she stood in front of the old nursery window, sunlight pouring in, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. Suddenly, she was no longer an adult. She was a girl again, watching as her mother cradled a phantom sibling, whispering soothing words that twisted into cries of anguish. "You left me alone," she sobbed, the weight of abandonment crashing over her like a tidal wave. Just as quickly, the scene shattered. Emma stumbled back, her heart racing, gasping for breath as the vision receded. Had it been real, or merely another cruel trick of her mind? The nursery had become both sanctuary and prison, each moment a reminder of what she had lost, and every echoing cry a siren call that lured her deeper into madness. Now, the nursery seemed to pulse with a life of its own, each moment spent within its walls solidifying its grip on her psyche. Emma felt herself slipping, but a part of her welcomed the descent, the promise of understanding just beyond reach, hidden in the shadows. As she stood alone, surrounded by the whispers and laughter of children who never left, she realized she was no longer just searching for answers. She was becoming one of them. Chapter 7. The Revelation. The nursery was cloaked in darkness, an oppressive weight that felt alive, pulsating with the cries of children long lost. Emma stood at the threshold, heart pounding in her chest, the air thick with the tang of fear and despair. This was the moment she had been both yearning for and dreading, the confrontation she knew would change everything. The haunting lullaby whispered through the air, curling around her like smoke, beckoning her further inside. As she stepped into the dim light, the shadows shifted, swirling like a storm. Cribs, once mere relics of her past, now loomed ominously, their forms twisted and warped as if the very wood was alive with sorrow. She felt the nursery breathing, as though it were aware of her presence, and a chill crept down her spine. The cries intensified, echoing off the walls until they became a cacophony that overwhelmed her senses. It was then that she saw it, the figure emerging from the depths of the darkness. A childlike spirit, with hollow eyes that glimmered like distant stars, stood before her. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This was no ordinary apparition. It was the manifestation of her grief, a spectral reflection of the sibling she had lost. "You shouldn't have left me," it whispered, its voice a haunting echo of her own childhood fears. The spirit reached out with thin, translucent fingers, and Emma felt an electric jolt of recognition. "No," she cried, stepping back. "You're not real. You can't be." But the spirit remained, a sorrowful reminder of the past she had buried deep within her. The nursery darkened further, the shadows stretching and curling like grasping hands. Emma's heart raced, fear intertwining with guilt. The cries morphed into a chorus of wailing, filling her mind with memories of her mother's despair. The realization hit her like a brick. The spirit was tied to her unresolved grief and the guilt she had carried since childhood. "It's my fault," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't save you. I wasn't there." As those words left her lips, the nursery responded violently. The walls trembled, and the air thickened, the very essence of the place warping around her. Faded drawings on the walls twisted, morphing into grotesque shapes that depicted her worst fears, the loss, the neglect, the pain. Emma could feel the nursery's grip tightening, entrapping her within a cycle of fear and regret. "No, I refuse to be a prisoner here," she screamed, the echoes of her voice colliding with the nursery's cries. Summoning every ounce of strength, Emma forced herself to confront the spirit, standing tall amidst the chaos. "I'm sorry. I can't change what happened, but I can't let you take me too. I need to let go." The spirit faltered, its gaze shifting from wrath to sorrow, reflecting the depths of Emma's anguish. The nursery trembled, a violent wind swirling through the room, threatening to tear her apart. But Emma stood firm, facing the darkness head-on. "I choose to remember you, but I will not be bound by this grief." As the words echoed in the air, the nursery began to transform. The walls shifted, peeling paint revealing the bright colors of her childhood, a gentle reminder of happier days buried beneath the sorrow. The cries softened, fading into a whisper, the air lightening as the shadows retreated. In that moment of emotional revelation, Emma understood that to break free from the nursery's hold, she had to embrace her past. She reached out to the spirit, offering it the love she had never shown. "You are not forgotten," she promised, her heart breaking open. "You will always be with me, but I must move on." With that declaration, the nursery shifted one last time, enveloping her in a warm light that pierced through the darkness, illuminating the path to healing. Emma felt the chains of the past begin to shatter, her heart lightening as she faced the truth. Love could exist beyond grief. She was ready to leave the shadows behind. Chapter 8: Breaking the Cycle. The air hummed with tension as Emma stood at the heart of the nursery, the warmth of understanding igniting a flicker of hope within her. The spirit hovered before her, its eyes shimmering with unshed tears. In that charged moment, she felt a profound connection, the invisible threads of grief and love weaving together. The nursery's shadows began to retreat, pulled away by the dawning light of acceptance. With trembling hands, she took a step closer to the spirit, heart pounding like a war drum. "I see you," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush of emotion. "I feel your pain, but I can't let it bind me anymore. I need to set you free." The spirit's gaze softened, and Emma could sense the weight of countless sorrows pressing against her chest. It was a reflection of her own struggles, loss, abandonment, and guilt, but now she was ready to release that burden. She closed her eyes, summoning every memory of her sibling, the laughter, the playfulness, the love that had been overshadowed by grief. "You were never meant to be forgotten. I will always cherish our time together," she declared, her voice steady, echoing through the nursery's walls. As she spoke, the shadows recoiled, twisting and curling like smoke in the light of her resolve. The nursery trembled, and a breeze rustled through the cribs, the dust swirling like tiny stars in the air. Emma reached out her hand, palm up, and felt the spirit brush against her fingertips, a gentle caress that sent shivers down her spine. "I release you," she murmured, her voice firm yet tender. "Go into the light. Be free." With that proclamation, the spirit shimmered, its form transforming into a cascade of brilliant light that illuminated the room. The cries that had once filled the air softened into a sweet melody, a lullaby that wrapped around her like a warm embrace. The nursery's curse was lifting, and she could feel the weight of despair melting away. In that final moment, she watched as the spirit floated toward the ceiling, disappearing into the light with a sigh of relief. Emma felt a profound sense of closure wash over her, the shackles of her grief crumbling to dust. The nursery, once a prison of terror and sorrow, now resonated with a sense of peace and healing. As she turned to leave, the air felt lighter, filled with warmth and possibilities. Cribs stood empty, no longer haunted, and the walls that once echoed with anguish now reflected a soft glow of hope. Emma smiled through her tears, ready to honor her sibling's memory without being bound by the past. Just as she stepped through the door, a gentle whisper brushed against her ear, a caress of wind that felt like a kiss. "Thank you," it seemed to say, a final goodbye filled with love, not fear. With her heart lighter than it had been in years, Emma stepped into the sunlight, feeling its warmth on her skin. She turned back one last time, taking in the nursery's transformed beauty, a sanctuary reborn. She would carry the memories, but they would no longer haunt her. Determined, she walked away, ready to rebuild her life. Each step echoed with the promise of new beginnings, a journey ahead that would honor the love she had lost, transforming pain into strength. Emma was no longer trapped. She was free.